do people, young men in particular, join rebel Islamist groups in other countries? Why do these young men participate in civil wars, and what do these fighting experiences make with them during those wars and afterwards? Questions like these were very much on the agenda a couple of years ago, especially with the widespread phenomenon of not just men from Arab countries to join ISIS in Iraq and Syria, but also from Germany, France, Belgium, and other European countries. And in many instances, this was even the case for recent converts to Islam who joined the fighting going on and who have since then been a major problem because there seems to be no clear policy on how to deal with those former ISIS fighters. While most of the attention of German media and research was on the Middle East with regard to this question, there was apparently a similar dynamic going on with Al-Shabaab in Somalia, which managed to attract Muslim Kenyans to fight in their ranks and to join the struggle in Somalian politics. It is a pleasure to have Hawa Noor with us today to talk about this topic, as Hawa has just published her book, Mobilization for Violent Politicized Islam, Motivations of Former Participants in Al-Shabaab with Routledge. Congratulations on the book, and thank you so much for being here, Hawa.
Thank you so much, Roy. It's an honor to be here.
Maybe a couple of more words regarding your person. Hawa did her master's in Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Magdeburg in Germany, and she did her PhD here at the University of Bremen, more specifically with the BIGS, the Bremen International Graduate School of Social Sciences, and that was from 2017 to 2021. She also has many other job experiences as a journalist, as analyst in media studies, with positions from Kenya to Tanzania. She has been living in Bremen for a while now and currently works at the BAN, the Bremen Network for Development, where she works on themes like human security and global youth engagement. Now, maybe to start with the beginning of that, so how challenging was it to research these Kenyan fighters in Somalia? I mean, the question for me would be like, how would you even find them, get up to open up to you and to your research?
Thank you, Roy, for having me again. Yeah, it was really quite a big challenge, but at the same time, I have to say it was not quite difficult for me because I'm someone who has worked in the region, in the continent of Africa for some time. And when all this Al-Shabaab menace began, first of all, I was working in the interfaith dialogue space. And for that reason, I have connections to religious leaders and communities in the grassroots, especially Muslim communities. And when all these Al-Shabaab issues on menace began, of course, some of us were involved in trying to find out why people in our communities had decided to be violent against their country people, countrymen and women. So I was one of them, and I was involved in some of these discussions. My observation was that there was a big gap between what was discussed in Nairobi, the capital city, and what was happening in the grassroots that I know very well, understand very well, because it's also apparently my own community as well. So I got more interested, and through these religious leaders' connections, I could understand some of the dynamics on the ground, which was not really what was discussed in the policy circles. So I kind of got more and more interested to understand why, because the problem was these people who left Kenya to go and fight in Somalia. Was the major problem that was being discussed. And therefore, I got kind of contact to these religious leaders, and then I got contact to understand. And this is where also my PhD idea emerged from, because I realized there was a big gap between policy and grassroots discussions. And it was, well, challenging in the sense that, of course, you have to balance different balls. On one hand, you have the state that treats these people as criminals who have left their own country to go and fight against their own country. Like, this major Westgate Mall attack, that was really shocking. And, the Al-Shabaab also, that was after people, any traitors from the community who was working with the Kenyan state. that is seen as an enemy, sort of. So I had to really narrowly balance, very carefully balance between these two. And yeah, in that case, I had to do, when I joined Biggs for my PhD, I've just explained how the idea was of my PhD emerged. So I wanted to fill this gap. And when I was at Biggs, thankfully I got this financial support. So I had to do some prior visits to kind of understand, assess the ground, justify myself many, 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 many times, telling people, hey, I'm with you. I'm not your enemy. I'm not one of those who is here to judge you and to say, oh, you're the bad guys. I'm here to understand, because something actually was, for me as someone who is from this community, was not making sense. Like the whole community being seen as the enemy, you are with us or against us kind of sentiment. And I understood, yeah, I understand my community as very peaceful. They love peace, of course, like anybody else. And therefore, anybody who was working with these, agencies in the name of countering violent extremism, as it's called, you would be seen as someone who is, a traitor or someone who is here. People treat you with a lot of suspicion. So for me, this interfaith network was really important because these people knew me before. They still know me up to now. They know I mean well, and they know I understand what's happening in my own community. And this was, I think, the most important thing for me in accessing and winning the trust of these people. So, and when of course, I went for my field work, I had to really show this in practice. Like, I had to explain to them who I was, because this is not the religious leaders that I was dealing with. These were just, like middlemen. So they kind of spoke on my behalf to these people who are actually in hiding. And when they met me, kind of, they knew this was a good person who meant well, but still they had to do their own assessment. People, I think, sometimes don't trust each other 100%. So I had to be honest with them. I had to really explain to them, hey, like show them really that I understood the context and what was going on, that I showed a lot of empathy. For example, I don't think anybody would disagree that there's a lot of police repression in Kenya. Like, show them that you understand what they are going through and they are suffering through state actions. And, this is, of course, not to say that I always agreed with them when they were wrong, or maybe when they expressed some conspiracy theories. I would tell them, well, I think sometimes I would challenge them, but, in a very careful manner. And yeah, so um, I think these are some of the things that really helped me, especially the understanding of context and the networks. And of course, the cultural sensitivity was really very important for me, showing that I was not this, arrogant someone who went abroad and then came back and now wants to study us. This is something that people, I think, most of the time, we as researchers or people working in the development aid sector, we tend to think people on the ground don't know. That's very wrong. People know these things. They really understand. They live in these realities, and therefore they totally understand what's going on. They know who is with them, who is against them, and therefore a very important point. This doesn't mean that everything was smooth. In some situations, I had to really make some experiences that were not quite pleasant. At some point, someone just came and thought I was talking to someone. I was sitting with this interviewee outside a mosque, and then some guy just came. I don't know who he was up to now, but I think I came to learn later that he was, one of this network people on the ground. So he didn't like it, So also, there's some bias against women sometimes. So the fact that I was sitting with this interviewee outside a mosque, he just came and, actually physically tried to push me out. So the good thing is that I had two people that I always walked around with, who were my, I would say, research companions, who were assigned to me by, they're actually working on a voluntary basis, and they were assigned to me by some of the religious leaders on the ground. And religious leaders, as you know, they're very trusted on the ground. And so they came to my rescue and explained to him, and then of course I was saved from the situation. Another experience is I talked to this guy who was actually a recruiter himself. He was a senior guy. And he told me on the face, yeah, I am going to tell you, I'm going to speak to you, but if something happens to me, you will pay. I will not come after you, but you will pay a big price. So, of course, when someone tells you that and you can't guarantee anybody, say it could be that he could get knocked by a motorcycle or a car right after the interview. And of course, I was carrying this burden.
Mm.
So these are some of the things, the challenges I experienced. But I should say that generally, I had a good experience in the field. I was very happy to be with people, to understand their daily struggles, to understand how they are misunderstood, to understand how they imagine, how they think about the world, which is a perspective that is often ignored. We don't ask people, what do you want? We draft policies and take it to the people, but I think sometimes you don't really ask them, what do you really want, what's your problem? And this is it was really fascinating for me. I was humbled really to learn about people and how they drive their lives.
How much does it help, would you say, to have also some background in journalism to approach these fields?
I think it helped a lot because in journalism you learn how to interview, how to speak with people, how to, um, draft a good, short and to the point, questions and all that. But I should say also some strategies in journalism were not really helpful for me because in journalism I like the research bit, the interviewing as a researcher, as a qualitative researcher who is very sensitive on his or her position and all that. In journalism, you can interrupt someone, you just confirm this and that, and then you just leave someone hanging and go and file your story, a scoop maybe. But in this case, maybe in terms of language, it was quite helpful, and of course the experience. But I should say I benefited a lot from my PhD training.
Doing your research over these years, what is it you found out? So what was the motivational context for these fighters? What was it that drove them to participate in the fighting and the war in Somalia, which, like you said, comes with a lot of cost because it made you into an enemy of the Kenyan state, and would it also put you directly against the interest of most of the Kenyan populations?
Well, generally, there's this perception in the world that people join these groups because they are, suffering from some kind of economic, kind of they have some grievances, economic grievances. They have some structural problems, like unemployment, like being, all these things that are related to the structure. But from what I understood, from what I learned from the ground, I think context is very important. So there's nothing like, what's happening in Syria. There's some similarities, of course. There's some grievances. There's some economic, disadvantage that some people experience in these contexts, where most of these fighters come from, or foreign fighters come from. But that's not the full story. So the full story is in the context. So in the context of Kenya, there are different factors, of course. You have to understand it from the point of the structure as well as the group itself, how Al-Shabaab was mobilizing and, winning, people to take to Somalia, winning their hearts and minds. So on one hand, Kenya is a colonial state. The borders that we have with Somalia and other countries are quite, colonial borders. They cut across, divide people, one communities. I mean, single communities. I mean, united communities that were initially one, like the Kenya-Somalia border. We have Kenyan Somalis and Somalis from Somalia, but they speak the same language, maybe different clans, but this is all across within the whole population. So at the coast, we have Muslims from, and generally the context in Kenya is that people on the margins, regardless of whether they're Muslims or not, the colonial state kind of marginalized people. people in the margins happen to be, one of the groups is Kenyan Muslims. And the fact that kind of there's a difference between what's going on in Nairobi and its areas, because this is where the colonial state was established, and therefore many amenities are based there. It's only after the 2010 constitution, where a new constitution was established, that kind of introduced these county governments with the idea of, disbursing funds to the grassroots so that development can be equalized. But at the same time, I mean, it's another debate whether this has been effective or not. But of course, there are some gains that have been made out of that. In any case, we have all these structural issues that are linked to colonization, to the colonial state, and of course, the identity issue, which is, if people feel marginalized, and in Kenya, most Muslims feel marginalized. That's why in the 1990s, you had this movement, the Islamic Party of Kenya, that mobilized Muslims, to fight for their rights, and because they felt like they were being excluded from, state jobs and all that. Of course, there were a small group that worked with the state. This was the approach. Like this organization called the Supreme Council of Kenya Muslims, it's still working with the state to reach the Muslim community, but generally doesn't enjoy 100% support from the community, because they are seen as people who are just working for their own benefit against the community. Not necessarily maybe against the community, but not necessarily fully for the community. With these people that are left there, there's a state that excludes them. Some of their own people work with the state, but really not really elevating their problems. So you have people who are just hanging there and knowing that, something is not okay here. And then Al-Shabaab comes. This is where Al-Shabaab came on board. Mobilization happened in other places. Of course, Al-Qaeda reached East Africa in different times throughout the 1990s. And they started working with some of these people by convincing them that, this is not fair. It's not. And of course, if you have a problem with someone and someone confirms what you think, it's very easy to convert you and to win your heart. And for people on the margins, I have to tell you, even up to now, I know people who have nothing to lose. I mean, if you have no meal, you have no basic amenities. And then on top of that, there's repression by security forces, where you're treated with a lot of, arrogance and all that. Then you have nothing to lose. Then the person who comes to you and is friendly to you will always win your heart and give you an alternative. And if money is involved, then it's even better. So this is how some of these people got to Somalia. And in that sense, I have to say it's very important at what point people went to Somalia. This is a movement. It was a group, and therefore at different times it targeted different groups of people. For example, according to my research and what I've also written in the book, initially in the 1990s it was very secretive, and they were not sure how to approach. There was a lot of suppression. I mean, even now, I think, but that time during the Moi regime, Moi has been labeled a dictator many, many times. During that time, there was no alternative completely. After the 2010 constitution, there was a lot of openness, and people could express their views somehow. But that time, it was really, really difficult. So this group was kind of underground. So Al-Shabaab kind of tapped into these small groups of people who believed in a very, I don't want to use the word conservative, but a very small circle of people who had isolated themselves from main communities, saying that, it's a kind of a small Salafist learning circles. So, but I'm very careful to use the term Salafist, because people have always say, yeah, this is a problem of Salafism. It's global jihadism is a problem of Salafism. No, it's really linked to context and how people interpret religion. And some people claim to be Salafist, but they are not really violent in that sense. In the 1990s, I think mostly they tapped into these students who had they were so frustrated, and led by Sheikh Abdulaziz Rimo. He lived in Kwale County. It's a small area part of Kenya in the south coast of Kenya. where I also did my field work. And he kind of he was not involved in the Islamic Party of Kenya movement, but he kind of isolated himself. He criticized Moi that time, and then at some point he got tired of everything and he said politics is doesn't help. So he moved his house, moved with a few of his students, and they really they lived in an isolated completely. From they banned their ID cards, identity cards, and isolated really themselves from the state, any state activities, and labeled anybody who was who did the contrary as a non-believer. So I think this is the group that Al-Shabaab joined. And that time, we have to remember, in Somalia, there was a lot of, development. Somalia was seen as a country that was being invaded by, infidels, in quotes, if I can put it like that. And there was a lot of support for Somalia. So it was very easy for Al-Shabaab to gain recruits from Kenya because they said, yeah, these are our brothers. And if you look at the religious books, it doesn't really ban. It says you support your brother. In what context? That is the debate now. But somehow they understood it like that. This is the time they need us. Our brothers need us, so they went. And this is the group I call revolutionary activists or the revolutionary pathway. And then later, there was a lot of course, with the shocking Al-Shabaab activities in Kenya, including, like I mentioned, the Westgate Mall attack and many other attacks from the year 2011. The police, of course, activities increased, and there was a lot of suppression. And this time, I think Al-Shabaab tapped from the people who are really angry with this repression by the police. There were police officers who went to the mosques and they went in with their boots. They beat up people. They abducted people and did all those extra legal activities. And this is when most youths were really convinced that yeah, let's just do it for us. This is enough is enough. Mm-hmm. And then there are people later who or maybe around the same time who are also offered money. Some people went there because they just wanted to gain from gain something from that because they were of poverty or and then of course we have women also who joined later, much later if you ask me, because initially I think it was a men only affair. So later women were also involved. Some were even abducted and taken there for some reason. So it's not just a structure issue. It's not just about people are deprived, because there are people who also are quite well off economically who also joined. And there are many people, actually, in my very surprising, I mean, with these ideas of believing that people who are the more religious you are, the more, you likely you are to participate in Al-Shabaab or other, Islamist group activities, violent Islamist group activities. Most of my interviewees they were not so conversant with Islamic affairs. Like from there, I asked them about their qualification. Most of them, actually, one of them had a kind of a decent level of had certificates in that line, but most of them did not really have a lot of religious knowledge. And this tells us, of course, that it's not just about religion. Religion is very important. It can be very dangerous mobilization factor. And this is exactly what happened. You can twist because people already believe, they're already convinced. So if you justify something using religion, it becomes a very easy mobilizing factor.
So, I mean, so much for the diverse background in what spawned the motivation to enter the fighting in Somalia, but how do these people then talk about their fighting experiences after making that decision to go across the border and engage in fighting there? So what happens then to these people?
You mean by the time when they come back, or from?
No, the time they are in Somalia and involved in the fighting. So how do they talk about their time there? So not about what drove them to go there, but how do they talk about and reflect their decision also with regard to the experiences they make during the fighting, what you say?
Okay. So this is the one of the things I did not want to dig too much into because then it's takes me. I was quite interested to understand how they joined and what brought them there. But it was quite dangerous for me to dig too deep to ask them their experiences. Of course, I did, which I will share shortly. But asking them really very many questions in this line, I would make myself quite vulnerable, like a spy, you know. So, and I don't be very happy to could have been very happy to discuss this in much details. So what they told me, and I also discussed this in the last chapter on returning from Al-Shabaab and why they came back. Okay, initially they thought they were going to help they had some fantasies. They imagined they would get there, it would be, you know, like a paradise, a small paradise where they would get everything and you know, be welcomed with open arms and, you know, like a really paradise situation. But that was not the case. So some of them said they were not even paid whatever they were promised. They were beaten up. And then in Somalia, there's this thing of, you know, clan conflicts and some discrimination dynamics. So some of them actually told me they were being asked, what made you come here? So there was also conflict amongst them and people who are locally recruited from Somalia itself. This, you know, the really junior rank and file from Somalia. So they would have conflicts among themselves. And one of the Al-Shabaab leaders that time was really in favor of these foreign fighters because he said they were they came all the way to save us in our situation. So he kind of favored them, and this kind of created a situation of jealousy between them and the local rank and file from Somalia. And so there was all these dynamics of rivalry. And of course, even amongst Al-Shabaab leaders, there was conflict amongst them. One faction was in favor of really very extreme violence, and some of them were kind of lenient. This nationalist group that they were more interested in sort of making Somalia, participate in kind of reforming the Somali state. And one was really for, you know, extreme violence and really did not believe in any constitution and all that and all these secular models of government. Yeah, there was all these dynamics of you know, conflicts, and it wasn't just one straight line that, you know, you go there and you fight and this is your place and all that. And they also spoke about getting the kind of being discriminated in the sense that they were being given some tough work, like tougher work than others. They were generally not very well treated. I saw some women also spoke about their experiences. They were beaten up, they were raped. I documented this, of course, in my book, but this really needs a lot of further research to establish something stronger. In any case, they came back when surveillance was really maximized. Of course, there was a lot of counterterrorism activities and countering violent extremism activities in different regions in the Horn of Africa, of course, included. And when all this, especially the counterterrorism surveillance activities, were heightened, this is the time some of them really had no hope anymore, because some of them used to send money. The money that they got, they would send to their families, and they couldn't do this anymore. So they kind of tried to establish a relationship with the government of Kenya through some middlemen, of course, religious leaders also involved. And this is how they came into contact with the state. And then this amnesty was announced in 2015. Yeah, I'm not sure where this debate has reached in terms of you know, reintegrating these people back to society. But as far as I know, back then when I was finishing my fieldwork, which is about you know, like about three years ago, I think these people were just there in the community. And sometimes once in a while you'd hear someone has been killed by somebody else and all that. So I don't know how many of them are still in the communities. I am not sure who they work for. But moving forward, I think it's very important to, you know, work for justice and promote reintegration, proper reintegration of them into the community, so that they can kind of be constructive members of the society, other than isolating them being isolated. Of course, they're being not welcomed by the community, kind of stereotypes them as former Al-Shabaab, and the state also treats them like criminals somehow still, despite the amnesty, which is actually did not really function very well.
Yeah, maybe on that also. How contested was the issue of the amnesty law when it was passed, would you say?
It was passed in 2015, but then again, the issue of not understanding context very well, or whatever reason behind it, it kind of failed, because they tried to give them some activities and resources to reestablish their lives. But then this leaked, and there were some people who actually refused to talk to the state. Some of them, I mean, 1, 2, 3 of them initiated this process, this amnesty process. And of course, through this community network, somehow they reached someone, and then one faction, which was those who accepted to surrender and to work with the state, kind of work and really refuse to be involved in any way in violence in future. And those who worked for Al-Shabaab, of course, Al-Shabaab kept coming after them also. So you would hear stories of people who, one interviewee told me that sometimes they sleep on trees because they feared someone would come for them at night. And when this group that was still working for Al-Shabaab learned about the amnesty, there was a lot of killing. So some of these leaders were actually eliminated, those who were leading the amnesty talk. The first one got killed, and then later the deputy sort of took over, and then he was killed again, and then the whole thing fell apart. And up to now, I don't know if there is any program that have been initiated in this line, but at least I know that it really fell apart.
Was there ever an estimate how many Kenyan Muslim fighters made it to Somalia for Al-Shabaab?
They say in thousands, but nobody knows. There's no proper. I don't know if I have any numbers that I wrote down in my book, but at least I remember that there was no specific number. But many people came from, of course, Muslim communities. And at some point, it was people who are newly converted. But this is the strategy that Al-Shabaab uses. It understands the community, it understands the dynamics, knows what we want, what annoys us, what makes us happy. And therefore, at some point, they also came for the newly converted people, new reverts or converts to Islam.
So how long did most people stay?
I think the first cohorts went around 2008. I think until around 2014, I would say. But some of them are still there, I would say. Some of them, it's claimed they are still hiding in some forests, Boni forests, between Kenya and Somalia. It's a very huge kind of the Amazon forest of Kenya, if we can make it clear. So it's claimed that they're there, but there are other, people also. Some people are really do not agree with this and think it's just a strategy for something, political strategy for something. I have no idea, but at least this is what is claimed, and this is the Kenyan cohort that moved there so that they could attack Kenya.
Maybe also on their justifications and reflections over time. I mean, you've talked to them after this has all occurred, etc. So how do they frame how they fought for the sakes of Islam, for the sakes of Kenyan and African Muslims or so? So how would what justifications would they find? And maybe also on those who don't believe that anymore, I don't know, who distanced themselves from the early decisions, how would they bring in religion to make sense of that?
Some of them actually say that now I understand Islam. I did not understand Islam before. I know Islam means peace. This is to cite someone very directly. and they say they just want peace now. It has not helped. This struggle has not helped me with my family. It's only brought problems to my life and to my family. So I don't want to be involved. I just want to be a peaceful citizen. But some of them are quiet. Many of them are quite quiet. And silence sometimes is not necessarily a positive thing. So from if you if we looked at it from if we look at it from an analytical point of view, of course you see a lot of negative piece there because the problems are still there. The state is still there. It's still repeating the same mistakes. Of course, some improvement, fine, here and there, workshops, discuss problems and all that. Are they working? Are we in a better place as a society today than we were a few years ago? I would say not really. And this is the dangerous thing that really scares me because we are still there. We have not done much to promote inclusion and justice and harmony. And these are the things that are essential to make people really satisfied and to make people understand how religion was really misused to mobilize them, how they can be included as part of this society of Kenya and taken seriously as part of these, people. So far, I don't think there is much that has happened, but this is typical of our Kenyan politics. We have our report that is called the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Report that is still gathering dust somewhere in Nairobi. And this was about, reconciliation, promoting justice, inclusion, and all that, all these injustices over the years since independence, or even before. I don't know. But in any case, if things are not straightened up, so we'll still have people who are dissatisfied, and we will always believe because God is fair at the end of the day. God is the most fair. Everybody cries to God when they have when worldly things cannot be settled by human beings. We cry to God, and if someone kind of creates a community where God is the most feared, then you'll always have people who will be convinced that that is the only way to go about things, and this is the most dangerous thing we have to keep worrying about.
So what would you say, how has the interfaith dialogue, you also knew from how it was in the 2000s, how did this change between the 2000s and now the 2020s after all these experiences with those Kenyan fighters and Shabaab and coming back, etc.?
Well, I would say that interfaith dialogue needs also to include intrafaith dialogue, where people discuss really strong concepts, strong ideas of religion. But I think this capacity is still missing. Interfaith dialogue is a good thing. I enjoyed working in this field, but I think it's quite shallow because sometimes people just talk. Sometimes you have this feeling there's a dominant group that it's the one that is right, and the others have to follow. So they don't speak like at eye level, on an equal basis. So I think with all this, there's also this stigma that Muslims are also seen as the guilty ones because some religious leaders actually were siding with the state and saying, supporting very, very suppressive counterterrorism laws, security laws that were really against Muslims. So that is to say, some of these religious groups are also fighting for their own interests to be the dominant group. So I don't think interfaith dialogue is really at an eye-to-eye level in Kenya. It helps. I'm not really trying to discredit their work. It really helps to calm down things when things are really tense and all that. But there's a lot to be done, to be desired in this field where respect for all religions is there. And so far, I think Muslims are seen as the black sheep in the whole constellation, and this has to change. I'm not saying that all religious leaders are think like this. There are very many really very progressive religious leaders and scholars in Kenya who think and see they put justice first. But these mainstream ones, and especially the new evangelicals, are really the culprits, and something has to be done in this line. But I think sometimes it's about capacity, maybe lack of political will to discuss these things. And of course, all these things kind of play the role. Kind of create a mix that is, create this toxic situation at the end of the day.
Wow, thank you very much, Hawa. This was really, really insightful, and I think I understand some of the dynamics much more better than before that. So thank you for this. Thank you for the occasion and for talking to us and explaining this to our listeners and to us. And yeah, all the best to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roy, for having me. It's an honor.